Welcome to the Out of Darkness podcast, Evil Part 1, an In Darkness, In Delight media production. Hey, as I said, welcome to the Out of Darkness show. I'm your host, Brent. This is the show where we discuss all things supernatural, paranormal, occultic, and strange phenomena. But we have these conversations by analyzing them from the lens of scripture and a biblical worldview. I am actually joined today. This is the one episode that I think a lot of people have been waiting for, but I am joined by the lovely Lydia today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good now that I'm drinking my mint tea.
So, if you didn't hear, this is our first episode. So, we're going to do 4 episodes because there was 4 seasons in Evil. First disclaimer that I want to say is this is not an attack on any of the actors or actresses that are involved, or even the people that started and wrote the show. It was actually really great acting, and the storyline, in my opinion, was at least consistent.
It was actually pretty well written, I thought.
Yeah. So why are we talking about it? That's the question. Well, the reason why we're talking about it is not the writing. It's not the acting. What it is the topic of this particular show. And each season gets a little bit more crazy than the next.
Yeah.
We're not going to really introduce characters per se, but what we are going to do is basically introduce the different things that they had in the show.
Themes, basically.
Yeah. So, for instance, if you guys haven't watched Evil, this is not something that you need to watch to understand, to be honest, what we're going over.
But if you want to, it's on Paramount Plus.
Yeah. So the first thing to really point out is how we did the research for this. So my job was to basically find the doctrine that they used, and Lydia's job relating to this was involving the Catholic Church and the different things that took place in this series. And so all this first episode is essentially an introduction. It's an introduction to the different themes and the overall story, but we're going to introduce where the theology came from. So let's get started, Lydia. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the 3 main characters. So you have one person who is he starts out in season 1 as being a priest in training, right?
Yes, he is a priest in training. He's a little older, so he traveled around the world, saw different religions, saw different everything. And he ultimately just settled to become a priest. And do you want me to finish introducing the characters?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The second one is a psychologist. She was raised in the Catholic Church, but she has since turned away. She believes she's agnostic, that there could be a higher power, maybe not. Then the third person, he is a scientist, and he was raised Muslim, but he's now an atheist.
And
so he brings...
He's interesting, actually, in the show, I would say, because he brings a different dynamic. Now, we are going to go over something with him specifically in that character later on as it develops.
Yeah.
But the first thing that we kind of need to talk about is, okay, so what they're calling these 3 people is assessors. And so what I asked Lydia to do is to, one, even see if there was a thing as, official assessors. And how does that interact with the paranormal, supernatural, and demonic matters that are presented within the show? So let's start with that first. Tell everybody what your research was, what you found, and how you kind of came to the conclusion that you did.
And like I said, I'm not Catholic, and so I was not raised around it, so I had to do research from the bottom up. And basically what I found is that there is no unofficial assessor team, so to speak. It's up to the exorcist to determine if it's demonic possession. And there are 6 different types of demonic possession that the Catholic Church deems that is possession. The first one, they call it just demonic possession, believe it or not. And it's where a demon takes over the body without that person's consent. The second is physical pain. It's where the demon doesn't take over their soul, but they inflict physical pain.
Like the scratchings and whatnot.
Yeah. And then there's diabolical possession, which is basically, they describe it like the story of Job, where he was afflicted and family was persecuted, family died, tragedy after tragedy after tragedy.
Okay, gotcha.
And then there's diabolical infestation, which is the possession of a house, an
Exactly
object,
what
animals.
it sounds pretty much.
Then there's diabolical subjugation, which is where someone invites a demon in.
Now, in my experience with that, most people that have any aspects of demonic stuff that happens in their life, this is just my experience now.
Yeah.
I feel like that is primarily how all of this stuff happens.
Yeah. And then the last one is diabolical obsession, which is where a person has obsessive thoughts about causing pain to others, and they don't really know where they came from.
So that's kind of like what, like psychopaths and like sociopaths, that kind of thing?
Or it could be someone that all of a sudden they're a nice, happy-go-lucky person that seems like they're genuinely kind to everyone, and then all of a sudden they flip a switch and they now want to. They have all these thoughts of killing someone, and they're like, "What happened? Like this person was like feeding the ducks in the park last week and being nice and kind, and then all of a sudden they want to kill the ducks. It's like, what happened? What's going on?
Right.
Like
right.
it's a switch.
I get you.
And within the Catholic Church, the exorcist, we have one here in the Nashville area, and I watched an interview with him on different YouTube channels.
I believe that's Michael Knowles.
Yeah, he did one.
He did do
one. Yeah.
Now, so Lydia had me watch that interview as well, and I think a good majority of what he said was pretty good.
Yeah.
But there was some clear theological issues that I had.
Yeah, but it gave a clear understanding of what the Catholic Church does, and which is what I wanted. And person has to be advised medically, psychologically, and psychiatrically. They have to be, and this is by law.
Right.
Here in the United States. So other countries, they may have similar things. I just don't know. And so the exorcist has to determine if it's a possession and what level of possession it is, if it needs to be referred, or if it's actually a psychological condition. But what's interesting is within the Catholic Church, there are 2 different types of exorcists. There is a minor exorcist, which every person receives when they get baptized into the church, because they believe that before you get baptized in the church, you need to have all the demons cleansed from you, and that's what their point of baptism is. That's why,
which they don't actually fully submerge, by the way. That's just it's just a sprinkling.
But that is they consider that a minor exorcist. So every Catholic goes through a minor exorcist.
Now, I believe now you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, since you did the research on this, but wouldn't like a house blessing be in the same category?
Yes, it would be in the same category. And a major exorcism is usually what you see in the movies. It's not necessarily to that extent, but that's usually what that there's exorcists come in, they do their ritual. That's what's a major exorcist. And that's why the exorcist has to determine is it an actual mental illness? Is the person faking it? Is the person actually possessed? And they actually have to determine that, because sometimes people that are possessed, it could be power of suggestion, or they could be mentally ill, or they could actually be possessed by a demon, according to the Catholic Church. For me, being a Reformed Baptist, I believe it's a form of sin and rebellion against God in some form or another. Yes, sure. I can go into, I'm not going to go into horrible detail on my theology on that, because that's not the point of this episode, but I'm just trying to explain the Catholic view, not my view.
Right.
If you want to know my view, feel free to email me, reach out to me, or come meet me in person. I don't really care, and I'll explain it to you.
Now, I will say, we are going to talk theology at one point, and we're getting there. But
is there anything else you have questions on that I can maybe try and answer? I'm not Catholic, but I'll do the best
I think the thing that we have to really focus on with these characters is that each one of the characters develops in a different way. Like, they're all working together.
Yeah.
And like I said, the acting was fine. The storyline was actually really consistent.
Yeah.
But there's one character that you're introduced to, and it's just a very weird introduction. So this character, he goes by Leland, and I don't want to reveal too much because it's gonna, kind of give away the other seasons and the other episodes that we're gonna do. But you really don't know who this guy is, and he starts revealing himself within a couple of episodes. I think what was it, 13 episodes a season?
I can't remember. It's 10 to 13, something
It was
like
like
that.
10 to 13 or 14. We can't remember.
Yeah.
But Leland is actually so. I don't want to reveal too much here, but essentially he's introduced, right, as like the arch nemesis of the psychologist.
Yeah.
And like how this, and the reason why we're talking about this is he's basically like one of the kingpins of the demons.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna try to explain a little bit more as we go on, but I think that was within the first like three or four episodes that he's introduced.
He is, and his character, you basically quickly realize that the reason he's doing what he's doing is because he wants what every non-Christian human being wants, is power and knowledge.
Yeah, so and
I
that's,
mean,
that's probably a good segue into another part of this. So what you have to realize, guys, is with the whole idea of demons and the whole idea of the power struggle of the spiritual battles that we do. So Christians generally, we're not worried about power because we have a God that is all powerful, all knowledge, and Jesus really did everything for us.
yeah.
And because he's at the right hand of the Father and he judges the living and the dead, Christians don't generally have to worry about that. And so what these particular people do, as far as any occultic category that you can fit yourself in, whether you're a Satanist, like Lydia's starting to kind of chuckle, but like I talk about this really often. So any like outside of the Christian worldview, like occultic point of view, the only person that they care about is themselves. Number one.
Yes.
And number two, they're always trying to fill a God-sized hole in their heart. And so one of the things that I'm going to reveal, and this is kind of like a thing that happens eventually, is that you find out that Leland, this character that we're talking about, was a former priest. I'm not going to give any more details than that, but that kind of has to be understood to understand why I'm saying it the way that I do. Mm-hmm. And so something happened basically throughout the whole entire thing, and saying that is there was visions that the guy who was becoming a priest, and at the end of season 1, he did in fact become a priest. He was having visions. Now, I have a real problem with this theologically, but I kind of want Lydia's perspective and what she kind of researched related to this. Because it's interesting to hear. So I'm going to tell you what happens. Basically, how they go about. So this character that's becoming a priest, how he goes about it is he has these visions. And so before I tell you as to how he pertained to have those visions, Lydia, where does this stand within the Catholic Church from the research that you did?
And I'm going to say this once again. I am not Catholic. Was not raised in the Catholic faith, so this is me doing research as a Reformed Baptist. So I will be biased in my research. So I gotta phrase that. So if it's wrong,
it's okay.
I'm just giving that disclosure.
No, you're fine here.
Catholics out there, please don't attack me because I was not raised and I'm learning.
Neither one of us. So, well, I kind of was, but that's beside the point.
Yeah. From what I understand is that they do believe in prophecies because you see it throughout their doctrine, and from what I understand, they're not sola scriptura like what I am, where I believe that my foundation and all doctrine, all knowledge is in the Word of God, and that's what I compare prophets to. And I don't believe that there is any modern prophets because it's the Word of God is it.
Right.
Okay, but the Catholic Church, they do not believe in sola scriptura, so they have other documents, ancient, modern, and So if one of these prophecies lines up with their doctrine, from what I understand, they take it as necessarily fact, but it's like it's plausible. And
Yeah, and that's where I have the issue.
and that's also a determination of how someone becomes a saint, because it has to go through certain categories. The person has to perform miracles and different aspects. I'm not exactly sure what the
I
steps
think
are, but
it's a bit jaded on how that happens, I think.
but
To
there
a
is an
degree.
aspect of prophecy in with that, like how.
Okay.
But like I
Gotcha.
said, I don't know the exact set because I don't.
And that's fine. Like that, and that's you described what I wanted you to
Okay.
describe. So the visions and how they happen, right? So I had a real big problem with this. Okay,
Yeah.
and not just because that this priest in training is having visions. Like that's not the problem necessarily. It's the fact that he's using in the first season drugs to basically hallucinate.
Because the priest in training having prophecies and visions lines up with their doctrine, but how he goes about getting those dreams and vision does not.
Right. Ooh,
Sorry.
careful.
Sorry, my bad.
Lydia smacked the microphone accidentally. So how he does this is really, really kind of disturbing.
Basically shrooms, right?
Yeah, he uses shrooms and a couple of different things, and the visions are what?
I said I got problems with shrooms.
I don't know if you guys heard what Lydia just said, but it's fine. So he's using like psychedelic drugs, and he uses a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so he's like, "Hey, I had a vision last night," and he tells this to the monsieur or the monsieur.
Yeah.
I think that's how you say it. Which that guy is like the head of that diocese.
Okay.
So like there's obviously within the Catholic Church there's a certain like charge, if you will, of basically who's in charge. So you have the local, you have like the head of the church, which we would say is Christ, but for their sake, it's that's where you have the cardinals and so on and so on it goes. But this particular guy that I'm referring to, and I could be wrong in how I'm saying this actually, he's basically in charge of that local diocese.
Okay.
And so it was weird because like the priest in training, he goes up to this guy that's in charge of the diocese at the time, and is like, "I had a vision." Well, they never ask him how he obtained the vision, and so it's like I just had a real big problem with it, because Scripture, the way that we look at it, right, as how we're supposed to look at it as Christians, is if it's not okay, if you have a vision or a prophecy, there's only two things to ask yourself. Is this consistent with Scripture? One. And is this prophetic, or is this something that is completely not even biblical related? And so the images that this particular show does a lot of symbolism. They do a lot of like these grand scale like vision. I don't even know how to explain it really, to be honest. I don't even know if you know how to explain it, do you?
Not really.
And it's just strange.
Yeah.
It's just really strange. So they basically, like, I think in the first season, they're playing off of that. They're playing off the visions, which, to my knowledge, that shouldn't even be done. As far as like if you're looking at Christianity.
Yeah.
Visions are not really worth your time if you're trying to convince someone of something, especially if there's drugs involved.
Yeah.
And, one thing that you need to know is he wasn't the only person doing drugs either. I think the therapist gets to a point to where, I mean, she basically loses her mind going into a couple of different seasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, the visions were weird. Lydia and I kind of didn't really understand that part of it. And I'll be honest, like it was kind of like, for me personally, it was kind of just distasteful. But like, so some of they go on to do I think there's like only 3 cases, I think, with the whole show, or 4 maybe, like in that first season. I could be wrong.
I don't remember exactly the number, but
So they essentially go and they start talking. So I guess I should say this before we do anything else. They started to use a certain document, and the one I actually thought it sounded familiar, and it turns out I was right, which we're going to get into here in a minute or two. But the other document, I had no idea. What was that document called again? Do you remember? I know you got your notes in front of you, but there was a certain document that they used for whatever reason.
Poveglia Codex.
Yeah, so this is a.
Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right.
Oh, you're fine. And what exactly is that? Like based off of the research that you did?
Prophecies transcribed by monks in 1550. Benedito Lapuente. He was a Carthusian martyr.
So basically, they use this document, which I guess they considered an ancient document. I guess. I mean, like I don't know how you classify that really.
It's not necessarily an ancient document, but it's part of their, not necessarily canon, as in the Word of God, like,
Right,
but
right.
it is part of like, oh well, he was a martyr of the Catholic faith, and so he had prophecy. So what he says.
I think that's how they justify the visions, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, something like that.
And the way that they do that is basically through symbolism, which I know more about symbolism than I feel like I should, because they try to say something that is just, when I finally figured out what they were talking about, my jaw dropped because I didn't fully understand why this document was being used and the manner that they were trying to sell it. Because ultimately, guys, let's be real, okay? Most shows are trying to sell you on something.
Oh yeah.
You know, whether it's a belief, whether it's a certain item, which they do all of it. Like
Yeah.
in this series, we're not joking. They literally throw stuff at the wall and I hope it sticks. I mean, like anything that you can imagine within the occultic world, they pretty much do.
Pretty much, yeah.
The one character that I love the most, actually, was the sister, the nun. She's a great actress. I forget what her name is right now. But she basically was like a no holds bar, like, I don't care who you are, this is happening. And so she saw demons, like she physically saw them.
Yeah.
And interacted with them, and basically, to me, she was almost the hero of the show.
She used
To a lot of extent.
She would use mortal objects to kill an immortal person, basically.
Yeah, and like, it was kind of like, to me, she kind of was like the superhero of the film, or the series rather. You know, like So I'm gonna try to not go super deep into this intentionally, because you're gonna keep hearing this over and over and over again. So one of the things that I didn't fully understand when we first started watching this show is, where did they get their doctrine from? You know, like the older document that you're talking about makes sense. But then, like, all of a sudden they're doing symbolism and they're pulling out the name sigils. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I understand symbolism. I don't know what all of it means necessarily, because, well, it's not really necessary to know.
Yeah.
But then they start throwing these sigils around, and they start throwing all of this supposed ancient symbolism around, and it just gets kind of confusing for a couple of episodes. But so you have this one document that Lydia just was telling you guys about, which it kind of, within the context of the whole visions things, makes sense. Mm-hmm. This, however, started to kind of get really strange really quick. So sigils, generally speaking, are from the Greater and Lesser Key of Solomon, and the Gratia. So I actually have a digital copy of basically all 3 of those. Yeah. And I've taken the time to read a good majority of it. I mean, obviously, we have several episodes to cover here, or rather seasons. But there's one thing that I started reading from. I think it was. Let me grab it real quick so I can see a little bit better. So you're introduced to this like within the first what 3 episodes, 4 episodes?
Um,
When was that introduced? Do you remember?
it was fairly early on because the psychologist started realizing, wait, there's this symbol, and then they get this document. The intercessors are given this document by the Catholic Church, and,
Which they took pictures of and they weren't supposed to know
yeah,
about.
and then she realizes, wait, that's one of those symbols was on a notebook that my daughters have that was given to them by Leland, and then she puts the two and two together and realizes, oh, and then they
Right.
do research to figure out, oh, well, where does this symbolism come from?
Now they
And-
claim that here's the issue. They claim that this document is ancient.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm here to tell you that it's not, and let me explain why.
unless you count, well, early 1800s ancient.
It was like I think it was more like mid 1800. No, well, no, I can't even say that.
Because Aleister Crowley edited.
And that's what I was about to get to. So the editor for the Lesser and Greater Key of Solomon, along with the Gratia, is in fact Aleister Crowley. So yes,
Dum, dum,
guys,
dum.
we're finally getting into the Aleister Crowley stuff.
After how many months?
Well, it's been almost a year. I mean, like we've mentioned him obviously through a good majority of our podcasts at this point. Like, and I'll be fair, the guy was a genius, a psychopath genius, but nevertheless he was a genius.
I mean, so was Joseph Smith. Doesn't mean they're right.
Right. So like there was a lot of things that were influenced by Crowley that people don't even realize, and this was one of them. So he didn't actually physically write it, but he was involved. And if you read any of his material, which unfortunately because we had to do, we're going into research on that. It's absolute craziness and nonsense. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, guys, but it's absolutely just bonkers. Some of the things that he does.
A truth is a lie, and a lie is a truth. So therefore,
Yeah, you're exactly
just wrap your head around that concept, and you can't. So good luck. That's all I gotta say.
So one of the things that's very weird about this show is they throw out sigils, and then you're like, okay, well, where did that even come from? Because like generally, you know, I think it's fair that most Christians or people publicly don't really understand this stuff.
Yeah.
And they don't understand how deep the symbolism goes and how far back it goes. Now, what I will say is the symbolism aspect probably is a lot older, but the writing of this particular theological thing, I guess, is not as old as what they're making it seem within the show.
Yeah.
That was the first issue that I had. I'm like, wait a second, why does that sound so familiar? And then, of course, within a couple of days, I figured it out. And, you know, Lydia and I work in the same office, basically. I have one half, she has the other half. And she just heard me just go, oh, crap. And she's like, what? And I was like, I don't even want to say this. And she's like, what's going on? What's wrong? And I was like, Crowley's involved.
Like,
She's like, what?
I was like, of course he is.
Well, I wasn't expecting that, though. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I was blindsided a little bit, you know? But, so I'm going to get into one of the text that's actually, they literally took this out.
Yeah.
Directly from the Lesser and Greater Key of Solomon. Directly, like verbatim, did not change it.
And the Lesser Key of Solomon is not some sort of hidden book within the Vatican that the Vatican only has. No, like you can literally
this is
get
common
it.
knowledge in the Vatican, technically speaking. I don't think that they're...
And you can actually get it on Kindle, which is what we're doing. So therefore, the show says it's like something that's like hidden in the Catholic Church.
only the Catholic Church has, which is
no.
completely false.
No.
So I'll try to be as quick as possible on this, and then I'm going to read a couple of things out of here that they actually say, like in the show.
Godspeed with that.
And it's going to make sense when I give you some dialogue here.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to mention is that obviously what I'm talking about, they believe that, and this is portrayed in the show as well. So this show is not about magic whatsoever, but it is a very ritualistic show.
Yes.
On both sides, both on the Catholic side of the story and on the Satanist demonic side of the story. And that's where it gets a bit confusing. I would say personally.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of confused at first, and I didn't really know if I liked the show or not. And like I said, and like Lydia said, like this isn't an attack on any of the actors or the writers or anything. Like it was well written. The actors did exactly what they were supposed to do, and you know what? Like that's just the reality of this.
Mm-hmm.
But going into the Lesser Key of Solomon, like one of the things that you first need to understand about this document, one, that it's not ancient. I'll be the first to tell you that it's not an ancient document. Now, some of the stuff that they may say could potentially be from the ancient world, but I don't think it is.
Yeah.
And the other claim that, like, okay, well, why is Solomon involved? And so that was the part that I was like, okay, I've heard this before, but let me actually look to see what they're talking about. So Crowley and other magicians throughout the centuries have believed that Solomon, because God gave him wisdom, was in fact a sorcerer,
And how we built the temple and everything.
right. So like he supposedly was, God gave him this ring. This ring he was able to control. The other aspect of the Keys of Solomon is there's like good demons, there's bad demons, and then there's like the middle ground demons. And the first time that I'm reading this, I'm going, that absolutely makes zero sense.
Yeah.
Makes zero sense to me.
Yeah.
So what they do in the show is they bring out the Gratia, which the Gratia is itself, okay, and I don't think I've shared this with you entirely, but the Gratia itself is basically the 72 demons and the classifications of these demons. Okay, so you have the higher demons, you have the mid card, and then you have the low card. Kind of like wrestling in a certain sense. When you think about it, wrestling, professional wrestling, you always have the high card, you have the mid card, which they call the jobbers, and then you have the guys way on the low end. The low end guys, basically, you never see. I'll just be honest. And so, like, they believe, they thoroughly believe that Solomon, because God gave him wisdom, was I couldn't even wrap my head around it. Like, it's almost comical for me to even try to say that they think that he was a sorcerer. Like how do you feel about that? Like, realistically, Lydia, like, how does that make you feel when Scripture says something completely different?
Because I believe the Scripture, so how I feel is that, well, the Scripture's truth.
Right.
So, in my head, yeah, you're not telling the truth. Sorry. That's how I feel about it. It's like you're not telling the truth. You're saying contrary to truth because...
Actually, that's pretty reasonable.
Like...
So...
I'd be like, okay, bless your little heart.
Now, if I would ever be faced... And it was weird one time because we actually... I'm not going to say the store that we were in, but we were having some issues with our phones, and one of the people that was working there started looking at Lydia and I's tattoos. And we have one that stands for the Doctrines of Grace, so it's kind of like what is it called, an ambiogram kind of thing?
I don't know. It's
basically just says grace, but it's the way that it's done looks similar, I would say, to a sigil. And because Lydia and I, that's the only matching tattoo that we have, because we both believe thoroughly in the Doctrines of Grace.
And then I have the Shiro.
And then Lydia has the Shiro, which is one of the oldest Christian symbols in existence.
Yeah.
And basically, it's the first two letters of Jesus Christ, basically, in the Koine Greek. Now, I was actually told recently, and I don't know how true this is, but I kind of have to say it. One of the part of the conversation that I was having with one of our pastors when we were over at his house was actually that symbol. And believe it or not, guys, that symbol can be traced back all the way to Constantine.
Yeah.
And that was a symbol that they actually put on the shield. Basically claiming that he is the Christian kingdom.
Yeah.
So I know it sounds like we're going off topic here a little bit, but I promise that this is still within the context of what we're talking about.
So what's she going to be reading?
So one of the things that they do is they introduce these 72 demons or these 72 sigils. Then you're looking at the sigils that they've put out on the table because, they weren't supposed to take pictures of it, but they take pictures of it.
Yeah.
Which is whatever. Okay. I kind of look past that because I'm like, this isn't even an ancient document. I don't even know what the big deal is.
But
okay.
It makes for a good story.
It makes for a good story. And when you're looking at the 72 sigils, I don't know how that translates to what I'm about to say.
60 were left, yeah.
Supposedly, yeah. There were 60 left. Now, this is directly from the book. And in this particular book, it's all three. It's the greater, it's the lesser, and the gratia, all in one. So there's a lot of information. Most of it is just like
conjuring spells, right?
Yes, actually, you're absolutely correct. Most of it's conjuring spells. Most of it I'm not even going to talk about because, again, I don't know how I can talk about it and even give you a sense of reality about it.
Yeah,
because it's that weird. It's that crazy. But there is one thing that I want to share out of this, and Lydia, I'm going to see if Lydia recognizes this.
Oh gosh.
All right, so here it is. I have it pulled up right in front of me, and it says the spirits of the gratia are portions of the human brain. Their seals, therefore, represent Mr. Spencer's Project Cube methods of stimulating or regulating those particular spots through the eye. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, the last season, but I don't want to.
Well, they show that though in the first season. And so, I'm kind of getting ahead of ourselves here a little bit, but they introduced this in the first season.
Yeah.
But when the assessors ask the head priest that has this document, why are there some scratched off? And they're like, oh, well, we killed the families off. And then there's this whole thing of, what are you trying to say? You're like the 007 of the church? Like, I remember that. And I'm going, okay, what are they doing here?
Yeah.
So the way that they play this out is they have this document, like I said, blowing up from pictures on the table, even with the cross, the crossing out of some of the sigils. And basically what they're saying that the sigils represent is the different actual, so they use a different terminology, but I'll try to make this make sense if I can. It's very, very hard when you're reading documents like this to make it even make sense because most of it doesn't. So essentially what they're saying is that these particular sigils represent households, and what they call them in the show is influencers. Now, because Lydia and I are content creators, and we're doing a bunch of different projects and whatnot, we would be considered in certain cultures an influencer. Now, am I trying to influence you guys on anything? No, I'm just trying to be truthful, and so is Lydia. But that's how they play this out. And so they play this out through, and it gets more detailed and more disturbing as the seasons go on. By season 2, I would say season 3 is the craziest one to me. The season 3 and season 4, would you agree? Or
yeah, I would agree.
But like the first 2 seasons, like you're starting to see development of what this is. So it talks about the 60, right? And so on the gratia in front of them, they literally crossed out certain things or certain, houses, if you will, of demons. And that's exactly what the gratia is, by the way, guys. Like it literally tells you, like the ranking of each one of these demons.
Yeah.
And then they start talking about archangels, and I'm like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to say is it gets really confusing really quick. Because, Lydia and I have a strong foundation in Scripture, and because, neither one of us are really easily swayed, as far as anything theological, especially if I literally pause it and go, yeah, that's not right. So that's the first one that I kind of wanted to share. Let me see if there's another one that I can find. Oh, here you go. Yeah, and this is kind of more of what we're talking about here. So this is another excerpt, uh, and this is what it says. Unfortunately, we cannot stop there. Solomon promises us that we can obtain information, destroy our enemies, and understand the voices of nature, obtain treasure, heal diseases, etc. And the last line it says in this particular part that we're reading here, it says, "I have taken these five powers at random. Considerations of space forbid me to explain all." So basically, he's like, "Well, I can tell you about this, but I can't really tell you about this." Yeah, there's an awkward silence in the room because, like, it makes no sense. Does it, like, what's your thoughts to that, Lydia?
Um, so you can tell me nothing. That's my response. That's my response is, so you're not going to tell me anything? Okay,
Well, so
great, thanks.
basically what he's saying is that they, through Solomon, uh, have this information, right? Which we actually cannot verify that because if you look into Proverbs, it's that's the only way to look at Solomon is basically through Proverbs.
Yeah,
And he was wise because God allowed him to be wise.
and he asked for wisdom.
And he asked for wisdom. And because Solomon didn't ask for anything but wisdom, people, for some reason, think that wisdom means witchcraft. And I'll never understand that. Like, guys, I have covered this several times, uh, both in like on our YouTube channel with reaction videos, and I have covered this with Cleveland and a couple of different episodes with Lydia. Guys, I'll be honest, like, it's just, that's not reality. Solomon was wise because God allowed him to be wise. He actually tore down false, all these false idols. You know, like, okay, so if a guy is tearing down false idols, okay, now we're not saying he's perfect.
Yeah, no, that's not
Because
it.
he had hundreds of wives and concubines. So
That's not it.
that's not the argument here. Okay, like we can look at that argument, but that's not a part of the context that we're given here.
Yeah,
What we're saying is that, like, essentially what we're doing is Proverbs 26 verses 4 and 5, which is, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, guys, but it essentially says, "Answer a fool by their folly," and then it turns around and says, answer the fool by their own folly. Again, I'm paraphrasing. So what does that mean? It means that we're only supposed to respond to the foolishness through wisdom.
they basically repeat back what they said said to you.
To a certain extent.
Yeah, and like,
But it's showing them their error, okay?
yeah,
That was literally coming from God basically intervening with Solomon. Okay? So, house divided does not stand. So, explain to me how you're able to basically say that Solomon was a warlock of some kind, but simultaneously getting wisdom from God. That's not how this works. And what they're also implying in that segment that I just read is that they essentially have the powers of like an apostle or Jesus Christ himself.
Christ consciousness.
Right. So, and that's the other aspect of what they're trying to show in the first season as well. They're trying to get you to believe that all of this is actual documentation that we can stand on it. It's just not. It's just not. I think that's pretty much everything that we were going to cover for the most part. Did you want to add any more onto it? I'm not going to read too much more of that just because it's
I think
craziness.
we did a great introduction to this because season 1 was basically the introduction, to the series, and I thought, like Brennan said, it was very well done, very well written, and as we'll go into a little more depth for the second season.
Yeah, we definitely
But
will.
this was I think we pretty much covered everything we wanted to cover. So if you don't have anything else to say, I said what I needed to say. So sorry.
No,
I know I'm rambling.
No, you're not. So I just want to encourage you guys to really think about, like, if you're watching one of these types of shows, whether it be evil, whether it be a different one, or even like the spooky Halloween stuff. Understand, okay, that part of that is based in a reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of it is literally, it's. I'll say it like this. So the first time somebody meets me and they're like, "Hey, tell us your testimony," I'm like, "You want the short version? Because the short version is still gonna take me about at least an hour for me to get to
The
it."
short version is I was a I was a shaman. Now I'm a Christian, and
Right.
like that's the
That's the short version.
Yeah.
So, and the reason why I'm saying this is because, the issue, right? And I was okay. Let me give the context and just get straight to the point here. I was an occultist for roughly 15 years. I've been surrounded by the paranormal stuff for 20 plus.
yeah.
I started this stuff when I was like 13 years old. So I'm pretty knowledgeable about not just the doctrine, but how a person would go about using these things to give you a narrative.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I've talked about a lot, not just here on the podcast, but I've talked about this on YouTube pretty extensively recently. And the whole idea, right, is they're trying to give you a false sense of reality. Because reality, okay, I'm gonna try to give you guys a short version of this, because there's not really a way for me to give a short version, but I'll do my best here, for time's sake. So reality is basically measured with, so like if we're talking apologetics, if we're talking about philosophy, right? The way that it's measured, as far as reality is concerned, is from ontology. Now, ontology basically is, it's not just talking about reality, but it's also talking about the mind. And our mind can only perceive what the truth is within that certain context. So the only way to determine reality is to be standing firm on a doctrine that allows you to stand firm on. And when you're there, when any show or anybody basically goes and says, "Oh, well, this is an ancient document," and then they basically are consistent throughout their whole entire thing, but simultaneously are trying to sell you on other things too. So, like, obviously, this is just the first season, guys. Like, it does get crazier as time goes on.
Yeah, and we'll explain that.
And we'll explain, and like how, like, they really stop using sigils at one point, and they do more of what the first statement from the book basically says. I'm not going to really talk about that too much in this moment.
Yeah.
But what you guys need to understand is that even these shows that seem like they're fiction, there is an aspect of reality behind them.
And as Christians, we need to be very cautious
Right.
about that. It's not saying that we can't watch them, but I'll give the example. For a long time, we couldn't watch Star Wars because Brent's request, because of the nature of the story. And so, out of respect, we just didn't watch Star Wars because of the occultic nature of it. Yes, I said that.
Guys, it's blatant, all right?
just-
Like, don't come on us about that. It's blatant.
But I'm just giving that as an example. Like, so if you are a new Christian, you may not necessarily want to dive into this. You need to be really more solid in your theology
Oh, absolutely.
to watch certain shows. Like, we're at a point now where we can watch something and be like, okay, we know what's wrong, we know the truth, move on. Let's just watch this for entertainment purposes.
And I'm to the point now to where, like, Lydia kind of cracks up sometimes with me because she's like, "I was expecting you to say something." I was like, "You know what? I got nothing to say in this situation." But yeah, so even if you're talking about something that is like, creepy, spooky, because let's face it, we're in October.
It's Halloween season.
It's Halloween season. It's spooky season, and we're not gonna sell you on anything that we don't believe in. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that I'm selling anything really at all. I'm just showing you the truth behind closed doors and down alleyways that you're probably not even looking. So with that said, like a good example would be, and I'll say this and wrap it up, guys. But a good example of something that people don't think is real was the first Insidious film. You remember that one at all?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, the reason why I'm talking about that quickly is because when I say my testimony to people, and I talk about what I went through, it's very similar to that particular film. And so people are like, wait, is that show about you specifically, or is it just a generalization? I was like, no, guys, that's a generalization of what is real, like what is happening within the occultic world. So there's so many things that are done in Hollywood, and different areas of the world that are making shows, they're making movies, they're making all these different things, and they say, oh well, it's just a fictional story. Here's the problem: it's not all based in fiction. There is an aspect of truth behind that. And so that's what Lydia and I are doing with this series. They're trying to show you the truth behind it. And the truth is that the symbolism, the visions, and the way that they're conducting themselves within this show, it's very tricky to navigate. But even though it seems like, oh well, this is just like a fabrication, like they do a lot of theatrics with the demons, which I kind of appreciated to a degree because they looked realistic.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them, like, I just completely kind of jaw dropped. And I don't remember if that's in the first season or not, but there's incubuses and succubuses in this, and like I'm not going to go into the full story, with what happened to me personally, because it's very uncomfortable to talk about, and I don't want to be demonetized in any aspect, so we'll just leave it at that. But there is a sense of reality out of every show like this, and you really need to be aware of that. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy this series that we're doing. This is the first big series that Lydia and I have done together.
Woohoo!
It's been a lot of time in the making, because like it took over a month for Lydia to do all that research that she did, because there's not a whole lot out there. It took me a long time to break down exactly what the heck they were talking about. Like in reality, like, because none of it makes sense. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I encourage you guys to think about the things that we've talked about and analyze it from your own point of view. You decide what you believe and who you believe in. If you have any suggestions of topics that you'd like us to discuss, or inquiries about the Out of Darkness podcast, please reach out to us via Facebook or Instagram, or you can email us at indarknessindolight@gmail.com. That's all for now. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more content. God bless.